Auschwitz, followed by Mauthausen. The third is Melk, and the last one is Ebensee. This is the 4 death camps. I had the misfortune to be a tenant in between 1944 and 1945. They were all designed for 2 reasons: to use the prisoners in the camp to build tunnels, and the tunnels were designed to hide the bomb what Werner von Braun was building to win the war. Strangely enough, that job was not finished till shortly after the war, and it was finished right here at Ellington Field. But at that time, they were hoping to win the war and hide these bombs in these tunnels. The 4 camps, Auschwitz was the camp where they took the people, where they separated the ones who are going to live and the ones who are going to die. Then a few who survived went to Mauthausen, which was camp number 2, which was known as a distribution camp. And from Mauthausen, the prisoner went to the 3rd camp, which is Melk. And the Melk was where I spent the longest time with the rest. And just about 3-4 weeks before the war ended, they took the prisoners from Melk, and was a death march. Whoever could march, they were taken to Ebensee, and Ebensee was the camp where the ones who survived were liberated by our heroes, the 3rd Cavalry, and especially my one special hero whose name I always mention, Bob Persinger, a brave country boy from the Chicago area who drove in the first tank and liberated Ebensee. So this is basically the camp history. In the 2nd camp, Melk, which where was, like I said, the longest period I was at, in July 8, 1944, the camp was bombed by mistake by the U.S. Air Force. In a few minutes, that mistake was noticed and immediately stopped, but sadly, it was too late, because roughly 1,600 people died in the bombing. Yours truly carry a small piece of the shrapnel in my chest as a souvenir forever. I didn't know I had it in till after the war. And a nurse who gave me the x-ray screamed. She said, "Sir, you got a hole in your lung." Then I realized I wasn't a whore, I was a piece of that bomb. Still there, so it's gonna be there forever. After I go see St. Peter, it's still gonna be there. So that is a little bit of the camp history. The prisoners were building tunnels. That was brutal work. Many didn't survive. Now you may ask, how is it possible that some survived and some didn't? Well, sadly, there is no way one could answer. It's the only thing I remember, when that freight train stopped carrying all the people from Hungary to Auschwitz, and the doors opened, and we had no idea where we were. And we got off the train. It was early in the morning, still dark, big spotlights. It's also a very scary sight when you open the freight door, freight train, and bingo, all this. And there is a long line. People stay in line, and surprisingly, a very ugly and sad sight. I never mentioned that to you. Evidently, the female prisoners they brought, they were also waiting to be inspected, not far from us. And these poor ladies, they were all totally disrobed because they took all their clothes and they stood there with no clothes on, which is really an ugly thing, and even the most brutal guy don't do that. But they were standing there, the men stayed on one side, and we were facing the line, and there I faced the famous Dr. Mengele. Dr. Mengele was a German doctor, and his job was to separate in Auschwitz who goes to the left, who goes to the right. Mengele was, like I said, a physician himself, and he selected. That's what he wanted to do. He sent people to the who goes to the gas chamber, who's not. And later on, what happened to Mengele? Right after the war, he was escaped to South America, knowing that there was a big price on his head, and he was living in South America, as I was told. And one afternoon he went swimming, and he drowned while he swam. That was the end of Mengele. That's the best I could find out. So the rest of us, they took us from Auschwitz. Fortunately, we weren't there too long, about 4 or 5 days. And the first stop for my case was Mauthausen. Mauthausen was a distribution camp where they distributed people who go to other camps, where they go to work. In Mauthausen, they didn't do much work. It was mainly distribution. Came in there and shipped out. And they did have a gas chamber too. The one who couldn't use, they could find a way to finish him up in Mauthausen. Yes, ma'am.
Were you with your family?
Pardon?
When you were taken in, were you with your family?
Yes, I was, and I lost them immediately in Auschwitz.
Okay.
They were immediately sent to the other side. So that was the last time I saw them. So basically, and then from Mauthausen, like I said, in my case, we went to Melk. Melk is, ironically, Melk is a famous city. They have a giant monastery on the top of the hill. When you take the train from Vienna to Linz, from the train you can see on the top of the hill a beautiful monastery. And so from the monastery, the nuns and the priests who lived there, they could look down and see the camp. And the camp is where they took the people every day who stayed in Melk, and took them to a tunnel. We were building tunnels where a bomb was supposed to be hidden, and that's the bomb that Werner von Braun built. And we built the tunnels where this bomb would be hidden. And that was our job. The one who couldn't work, well, they either died of natural death or they found some other way to finish them up. Then when the U.S. Air Force is approaching coming from the west, they took us in Melk, and they put us on a tugboat on the Danube. We went to Mauthausen. Melk. No, we were in Melk. We went to Linz, and from Linz we marched to Ebensee, the last place. And Ebensee, where we spent, in my case, the last 4 or 5 weeks before liberation. By then, prisoners who were in Ebensee, they were dying of hunger. There was no food. The pictures I have in position were taken at Ebensee before liberation, and the one who have the chance to see these pictures, you see that the prisoners were nothing but walking skin and bones. And then one day before liberation in Ebensee, they SS lined up the people, said the American army is close, we're going to fight them and beat them back. We don't want you to get hurt, so everybody has to go in a tunnel. That was the tunnels we were building for the bombs. Of course, we knew what the tunnels meant. The tunnels meant to hide us, and after everybody's in, blow up the opening and let everybody just suffocate in the tunnel. So we knew we had only had one choice, not to go, and we took a chance, and we said no. And the following morning, by some miracle, we looked on the guard tower, and we saw civilian guards. And that was the first ray of hope in 1 year, seeing the civilian guards in the guard tower. So that's the time. And then after that, you know, I spent a displaced person camp in Germany, waiting for my papers and immigration to come to this great country. And fortunately that day happened in later on in June 1945, and here I am. Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever been back to Europe?
Yeah, I've been back a few times. For a while I was running musical tours to Europe, and every time I did that, I never failed when I was close to any of these camps to go by. And Ebensee, when I went back, it was already a cemetery. The camp was torn down and they put in a cemetery, they call it. So ask one of the locals now who live in Ebensee, even the ones who were there during the war. And you go up to a local now, say, I'm looking for where the concentration camp used to be. Nobody heard of the concentration camp. No, we have a cemetery here. Nobody even ever heard of concentration camp. Even if those prisoners were walking through the city 6 times, 3 shifts going to work to the tunnels. Nobody's seen the people in prisoners. So anyway, it's a long story. So that's a little bit. That's the ugly part. The rest part is the good part. When I was able to put things together and start a new life, and came to this great country, and for the 10th year, according to Katie here, I had the privilege to talking to students at A&M, had the privilege to meet Dr. Kramer, who was kind enough to invite me down here. And the more questions you have, the more I like it, because these are the important thing, the questions. I think you were first.
How were you taken from your house, or how did that happen that you were actually moved into concentration camps?
I lived in the outskirts of Budapest, just about, let's say, Bel Air to Houston, very close. And in the outskirts, the city police from Budapest didn't go in the outskirts. They used the local, I say it's the local sheriffs. People, they looked like different than the city police, they acted different, and they didn't make nothing. They just came in, took you, put you in train, not knowing where. Next step is Auschwitz. That's how it happened. Yes, sir.
What was an average day like when you were in those tunnels, digging the tunnels? Like, how long each day were you working? Did they let you rest?
The tunnels were brutal work because you were building the tunnels, so they have 3 shifts. They work day and night, 3 shifts. Now the younger people, like kids, in my case, our job was carrying the pits, the little drill pits, and all the prisoners who were drilling, you know, you had to carry back to sharpen it. That's how the few kids who survived. And the tunnels are still there, some of them. I know the ones in Ebensee there, because I was there a few years ago and I had to search for it because the locals didn't know nothing about it. Finally I managed, And the tunnel is still up on the hill, and that's where the fatal days was supposed to be happened. Thank God it didn't, but that was the place.
What was your life like as a child?
What was the last?
Your life like as a child?
Fairly normal. As a kid, fairly normal. Went to school. Life was as normal as time could be in the 30s. There was already hate. There was already some prejudice. But yeah, in Hungary, they still looked at you as one of your countrymen, you know. If there was prejudice, it wasn't quite as open as in some other places. And my father worked at the railroad, so I lived a little small place outside of the Budapest. So that was fairly uneventful.
Do you have siblings?
Pardon?
Do you have brothers and sisters?
No. I was the only unlucky one. Yes.
Did you ever encounter any nice or sympathetic Nazis, or were they all just terrible?
No, well, no, yes and no. The sympathetic one who didn't get involved doing anything bad, that was a sympathetic one, because they weren't brave enough to come out. And once, what I did found a few times, on all the work we have done, like even in tunnels, they use some civilian labor, local civilians. These were not the regular prisoners, but people who were brought down just for work, just with us. And sometimes some of these civilian prisoner workers, sometimes they brought down some candy or some bread or something. When nobody's saying, they smuggled some to the prisoners. That was the good guys.
When you say that they didn't know that there was a camp there, do you mean that they just ignored it?
It's a good question. It's not that they just ignore it. They all knew. They lived with it for years. 3 times a day, the prisoners walked through the city to go to work. Now, they walked in striped prison clothes, wooden shoes. Speaking of wooden shoes, many of them in the camps died of food poisoning because the wooden shoes infected their feet until the foot became red. I think there was no medicine, no hospital. We lost many people to that, blood poisoning. So, yeah, these are one of the things. As for a brutal thing, in the camp itself, the only brutal thing what happened in a camp, a couple of times, what I recall, they found prisoners who tried to escape. The ones who tried to escape, they were put by the barbed wire. They had to face the wire 2-3 days, and then they took some strong prisoners, gave them wooden sticks, and they chased these prisoners and beat them to death.